There's something about the way you are that makes.
So, hi, hello, welcome to my astrology channel. Today I really want to talk about, now if you haven't recognized that little piece of intro, it's from the soundtrack of one of today's coolest TV shows, which is Killing Eve. Now, I'm not going to give away any spoilers about that show, but it is basically about a hired female assassin who happens to be a psychopath. And to be honest, I love that show. Obviously, it's like I've binge watched the entire show. Actually, not the entire show, but I think I watched the first 13 episodes in one day, which is quite a feat. And it really got me thinking about a subject that I had been thinking for a long time, and that is the issue of astrology and mental illness. And, not exactly mental illness, but different kinds of pathologies and things like that. Which is something that I really have been collecting information about for years, to be honest. Well, not exactly in a very structured way, but when I say collecting information, I mean storing information in my memory about different things that I have seen in terms of things like what would make a person a narcissist, what is likely to make a person violent, what is likely to make a person to become a serial killer. And in the interest of astrology and the knowledge and the craft of astrology, because I won't call it a science, I have really decided to make this video about astrology and serial killers and what exactly do I think, not just what would make a person a serial killer, but what are the aspects in a chart that would show a tendency towards violence, a tendency towards maybe being a psychopath or a narcissist, meaning narcissistic personality disorder, which is something that I'm sure you can Google online. This is going to be a really long video. I'm not going to edit it, so I don't know exactly how long it's going to take. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible and maybe make different separate videos on points that I will touch in this video later on, so that this video in itself is not that long. So maybe I will expand different themes in other videos at some point. Let me know if anything is going to be of particular interest. Also, before I get into it, if you like my channel, please support by subscribing and hitting the notifications, and in case you are interested in a personal reading, please email me at the email that I will write in the description, in the video description. So, to get into the video itself, first of all, I have to start with an introduction on the whole connection between astrology and psychology. Now, disclaimer, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not somebody with a credited, with any, how should I put it, without any degree in psychology. But psychology is something of particular interest. It has been a particular interest of mine for a very long time, and I've read a lot of articles about it. And I have particularly read articles on narcissistic personality disorder, and if you are interested in that subject, I would recommend Googling Dr. Ramani and Lisa Romano. They talk about this subject in depth, and what it means and all that stuff. So, what was I going to say about psychology and astrology? There's obviously a lot to say, but first of all, you have to understand anybody who follows astrology has to basically accept the idea of reincarnation. You cannot separate astrology from the idea of reincarnation. So if we are to start from the premise that astrology shows your soul's path in this life, and it shows your basic personality, your motivations, and all of these things, they go hand in hand with your life experience, which is also why when you are reading certain descriptions of an astrological aspect, what you're actually reading is the way that life will shape you to view the world in a certain way at the same time. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, basically different aspects tend to show towards different experiences. Therefore, they also correlate with certain psychological tendencies, behavioral tendencies, so to speak. It doesn't mean that everybody has a pathology or they're mentally ill in some way. But this is why, certain astrological aspects tend to show a tendency to mental illness. Because certain life experiences can also show a tendency towards mental illness. Namely, a person who grows up being abused will have a higher tendency to become abusive later on, etc. And oftentimes, when you see a person being abused, there's also a strong indication in their astrological chart that this is going to happen. Which doesn't really mean fatalism or anything. I won't get into too much detail right now, but the bottom line that you have to understand from this is that astrology and psychology go hand in hand, and they go hand in hand with the idea that in this life you are meant to have certain experiences in order to grow spiritually. You have to learn certain lessons, which are shown by your astrological chart. Not just your natal chart, but also divisional charts, like your ninth harmonic, which is called an Navamsha, and it's very important in Vedic astrology. And there are loads of others, where I won't get into details about that right now. So, what are the things that I really wanted to say? In terms of psychology, and I've mentioned this in previous videos as well, the single most important aspect of your chart that you have to look at in terms of finding out your basic personality, your way of thinking, your temper, everything, the single most important aspect is the moon in Vedic astrology. Planetary placement by sign, by nakshatra or lunar mansion, planetary placement by aspect, by house placement. And remember this, the moon represents the mother. It represents the early life experience. So here you can already see the correlation with psychology. Why? Because your early life experience, your relationship with your mother, influences the person that you're going to become later on in life. So basically, there are aspects to the moon that will show a person tends to become violent or cold, or things that will show affliction, so-called affliction. So negative aspects from negative planets towards the moon show that this person has had a difficult upbringing, which is going to put mental pressure on them, which is therefore going to make them more likely to turn into something, dark later on in life. And of course, there is no particular aspect that will show 100%, okay, this person is a serial killer, or this person is going to be a narcissist, or this person is going to be a psychopath. There is no particular aspect, but you can see tendencies. So you can look at a person's chart, and if you see a lot of aspects that I'm going to tell you show a tendency towards mental instability, emotional volatility, you can learn to keep an eye on that person, because you might think you don't know when they're going to snap, or like when they're going to do something weird. So, aspects to the moon, okay, because the moon shows the mother, and even when it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who has a negative aspect on the moon has had a very bad childhood. It could simply be like that the child has interpreted the relationship with their mother in a negative way. And what I mean by this is that a lot of the times abuse happens particularly childhood abuse, happens because, not because, but it happens in a very hidden way, that people around may not even see that anything is happening, but the child is not getting their basic needs met, or they're feeling unsafe in their own home, or the mother is narcissistic, or whatever is happening. And all of this is happening behind closed doors because the child doesn't have the emotional maturity and the independent thinking to say, my mother's being abusive, or to talk to other people and say my mother's being abusive. So a lot of this is happening behind closed doors. And I want you to bear this in mind when I maybe mention examples of when you see this aspect in somebody's chart and you're thinking, this person didn't have an abusive childhood. Just bear in mind that you don't really know what has happened in this person's life when they were a child. You don't really know the full details of their upbringing and the way that they perceived the parent in question. So there is the moon, and then the second most important, I would say, from what I have noticed, is the sun. Why? The sun shows the father figure. So affliction to the sun can show, for instance, a father who was abusive, a father who was completely absent or just emotionally absent. All kinds of things can show a father who was very arrogant, who took the child for granted, etc. And all of these things can lead to emotional and mental instability later on in life. So this was kind of like a short introduction. So let me get into the actual astrological aspects that I think that I have noticed might show a person who can become a killer or an abusive person, to say the least. First of all, you have to look for placements in Aquarius. And again, just a small parenthesis, I'm talking about sidereal zodiac. Placements in Aquarius, think about it this way, in Vedic astrology, Aquarius is a sign ruled by Saturn and co-ruled by Rahu. Now, in the other videos that I made, I made one video about Rahu and Ketu in depth, and I mentioned that Rahu rules the Maya, things that Indians call the Maya, so the illusion of the material world. Rahu is a demonic influence. It is a very negative influence. It makes a person obsessive and makes a person very, very, how should I put it? It rules things like being a parvanite, or to parveen, people who pretend to be something they are not in order to gain social acceptance. It rules cruelty because it is a demon. It shows people that are willing to do anything and everything for power. So people without scruples, people who are deceptive, all of these things. And Aquarius is the only sign of the zodiac that is influenced by Rahu. And this also kind of explains why, actually, when you Google things online, like what is the sign that is most likely to become a serial killer or connected to killers, a lot of the times in Vedic astrology they will say Pisces and Sagittarius and the other mutable signs. And when you think about it, it's like that doesn't make any sense. I mean, Pisces is the most spiritual thing, the most spiritual sign. It's ruled by empathy, it's ruled by emotionalism, and how does that make sense? Why does Pisces create the most serial killers of the zodiac? Well, in reality, a lot of those Pisces people are actually Aquarius in Vedic astrology and sidereal zodiac. And they're ruled by Saturn and Rahu. Okay, Saturn is a harsh planet as it is, but being co-ruled by Rahu makes a person pretty harsh, okay? And remember this, Aquarius is an air sign and it's a fixed sign. So it's one of the power signs, quote unquote. All of the fixed signs are seen as power signs. They are very rigid in their thinking, and Aquarius is notorious for being able to detach from their emotions. And I actually read interpretations made by other astrologers, Indian astrologers, who said things like Aquarius is the killer sign. It is the killer sign because they understand that death is just a part of the cycle. And because they can detach from their emotions, and they don't see, Aquarius people would just be like, oh, a person has to die anyway, so what's the big deal if I do it? I mean, I'm talking about a very malignant expression of this sign energy. I'm not saying that every Aquarius person is a killer, but I'm trying to explain how they can become that way. Particularly people with moon in Aquarius, they have this kind of thinking, that, death is just it's just a door that you walk through. What's the big deal? And with Aquarius placements, particularly, you can have killers. Not necessarily, rapists or other forms of antisocial, malignant behavior, but particularly killers. They can, because again, with Rahu there, if somebody gets in their way, they can just use any means necessary to get rid of that obstacle. And think about it this way: psychopaths are habitual liars. That's one of the key traits of a psychopath. And psychopaths can kill without a conscience, and they can torture without a conscience. Again, all of these things show emotional detachment. So a lot of the times, placements in Aquarius gone bad, or a lot of Saturn aspects from to the moon, to Saturn placed in cardinal positions in one of the cardinal or Kendra houses, the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, or the 10th house, will make a person really harsh and cold-blooded. Of course, does not mean that anybody with this placement will cross over. You have to see the big picture. And the second sign, there are two main signs that show a tendency to become a killer. The second is Scorpio. Why Scorpio? Scorpio, again, is the other sign, aside from Aquarius, that is being co-ruled by the lunar node Ketu, or the south node of the moon. And again, I mentioned this in the other video where I explained about Rahu and Ketu, and what they mean in depth. Ketu it rules oblivion. But also, remember this, in Vedic astrology, Ketu is seen as the higher octave of Mars. So remember, in tropical astrology, Pluto is seen as the higher octave of Mars. The higher octave, or octane, I don't remember what the word was, it's kind of seen as like a more refined version of Mars, so it's like Mars to the 10th degree or something like that. It's like the essence of Mars. And here you have Scorpio being ruled by Mars, being co-ruled by Ketu, another demonic influence. And remember this, Scorpio is a sign that rules power and the struggle for power. It also rules sexuality. So a lot of the times when you have Scorpio placements, you have these killers that torture their victims, or that are sexually motivated to kill, because they enjoy, the power that they get from torturing somebody. And this is, Scorpio people in general can actually be very abusive. If this sign is in its negative expression, they can be the most abusive people. It can show narcissists. It can definitely show narcissists. Why? Because what is the basis of a narcissistic personality? They are after power. They're after the upper hand. They enjoy putting other people down so that they feel more important. And believe me, I actually personally know 2 malignant narcissists who have moon in Scorpio. And remember this as well, in Vedic astrology, the moon is debilitated in Scorpio, which means that especially if you also have hard aspects to the moon from some of the planets that I will mention shortly, you will have a person who has a very skewed perception of the world, who is very emotionally volatile, unable to control their emotion, unable to control their anger, because again, Scorpio is ruled by Mars. These people are very emotionally intense. They tend to be obsessive, And Ketu rules oblivion. Remember, Ketu is the half of the dragon that is doomed to spend the rest of the rest of eternity floating in outer space without a head. So they are impulsive. They are have a tendency to be violent if they are provoked. And Ketu is nothingness. So again, Ketu is kind of like rules spirituality to some extent, but it basically rules death to a large extent, because it shows the dissipation of any energy. And it's the opposite of Rahu, which Rahu is the material world, Ketu is the spiritual world. Rahu is the head of the dragon that has been cut away from the body and is not just the head of the dragon, but actually the head of the dragon, so like the first half of the body of the dragon that has been cut, according to legend, in case you don't know what I mean. It has been cut away from the body and now it's hungry all the time. This is why Rahu shows constant obsessive hunger in any area of life that it touches, that you constantly want more in that area of life, because the head is eating, but it never gets to the stomach, so they are constantly hungry. Ketu, on the other hand, is floating around. It shows like more of an instinctive, blind side of the subconscious, because it doesn't have a head, it doesn't have eyes, so it's not a rational energy. It's a very irrational, subconscious, oblivious kind of energy. So this is just for you to get a visual of the kind of energy that Ketu dominated things have, and Rahu dominated things. So remember this, Aquarius and Scorpio, they are the two signs that are basically linked to things like death, like killing, like potential killing, potential violence. But in general, any kind of harsh Mars aspect or a dominant Mars placement can show a person who is prone to violence. And I'll get more into details after. The second aspect that I've noticed is recurring in terms of like abusive, not just abusive, but killers in particular, people, is placement in a nakshatra called Purva Bhadrapada. Purva Bhadrapada is referring to a lunar mansion, or aka nakshatra, that spans from about 16 degrees Pisces to 29 degrees and 20 minutes of Pisces. And when I say Pisces, I'm referring to the Western tropical zodiac. In the sidereal zodiac, this actually falls in Aquarius. Most of this nakshatra falls in Aquarius, or about half of it. I don't know exactly. But I'm just mentioning the Western degrees because it's probably easier for people to check. Because if you Google online, you mostly find charts in the Western tropical zodiac. So it spans from 16 Pisces to 20 Pisces. So what is about this nakshatra? It is represented by a funeral cot. It is, another symbolism related to it is a two-faced man or a two-faced person. It's basically a nakshatra that rules a lot of dark things. The best expression of this nakshatra is somebody who goes through a lot of negative experiences in order to achieve spiritual purification. And on the negative sign, it rules things like all the dark side of humanity, like to some extent. Not all the dark side, but a lot of the dark side of humanity. So it rules things like black magic, sexual perversions, death, anything connected to death. Again, most of it falls in Aquarius. The animal that governs this nakshatra, because every nakshatra is assigned to an animal that is most likely to express its basic instinctive nature. So the animal that is ruled, that is governing this nakshatra, is the lion. So it's a very powerful energy when provoked. Even though these people on the surface are happy-go-lucky, They can be pretty dangerous. They can be very hidden. Ruled by a two-faced man. This is a person who is very likely to keep a hidden world, a hidden life. And particularly with regards to their sexuality, these people can be very interested in expressing the dark side, or like experiencing the dark side of sexuality. And lo and behold, who do you think has their sun in this nakshatra? If I remember correctly, Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein has sun in Purva Bhadrapada. And yeah, I don't need to get into details about that. I haven't actually Googled too much into it. I guess you can search for more people. But one of the things that really struck me is that regarding Killing Eve, because I started with mentioning Killing Eve, the main actress, Jodie Comer, who plays the assassin, and psychopath, actually has her sun in Purva Bhadrapada. So again, what does this actually mean? I mean, does it mean anything? She's an actress, and I'm actually, again, this is something that I've considered making videos about for a long time, and I will make this at some point in the future. But when an actor plays a character very convincingly, it means that their energy matches that character very well. Because if you can't really play a character if you don't have it in you, if you don't have that energy in you to convince the audience that you are this character. And a lot of the times I've actually seen this is why I mentioned I've thought about making videos about this. I've seen actors, with different nakshatras, and the roles that they get most accolades for are usually roles that actually match their nakshatra energy in various ways. And another actress who also played a famous female killer, and also has her sun in Purva Bhadrapada, is Sharon Stone. Remember Basic Instinct. And again, both of these characters, both Villanelle in Killing Eve, and I think her name was Catherine Trammell or something like that, the killer from Basic Instinct, both of these characters are two-faced. They have one persona that they show to the world, and they have this totally different dark side of their existence that they keep hidden, completely hidden, and is completely different from what they are showing to the world. And this is an expression of Purva Bhadrapada. It is the two-faced man, a person who, and this can show in anybody who has a strong influence from this nakshatra. There'll be the kinds of individuals that, on the one hand, they're a doctor by day, and by night they are, conjuring demons, or they're interested in esoteric things. And you may not know, nobody may know anything about this other side of them, because they keep it completely hidden. So, yeah, these are this is with regards to signs. Now, there might be other aspects as well, but this is as far as I noticed. So, Aquarius, Scorpio, Purva Bhadrapada influences tend to show up a lot in the charts of killers, in the charts of people who, not just killers, but narcissists. Harvey Weinstein is, in my opinion, a malignant narcissist. Now, I don't know. I haven't actually Googled this, if anybody has talked about it, but he is a malignant narcissist, possibly a sociopath. Yeah, I won't get into Harvey Weinstein right now. But just to give you an example. And now, let's get into the main part of the video, which is the moon aspect and the sun aspect. And I've also looked at charts of serial killers, and this is going to take a long time. I might make a separate video because this is going to take a really long time. So I've actually Googled the charts of some serial killers, and I've looked for common themes. Actually, even before I Googled serial killers, I know that there are aspects that show if you're prone to violence and stuff like that. So, I don't know, I might make a separate video on the charts of killers. Because this is a lot of material. I will think about it. So, let me get into aspects to the moon, aspects to the sun that will tend to show a serial killer. First of all, Mars, okay? Mars aspects to the moon, particularly the conjunction and the opposition. The conjunction and the opposition, what does this show? It shows that a person has had an abusive childhood. Not necessarily, obviously there are variations, like you might think to yourself, okay, I know this person who has moon conjunct Mars, and they're a very happy-go-lucky person, and they couldn't have had an abusive childhood. Again, you don't know what happened in their life, first of all. And second of all, there are variations, there are nuances to every aspect, but worst case scenario, with moon conjunct Mars, you have some kind of abuse in childhood. It shows volatility, it shows that the person grew up in a volatile environment, so it may not be that they were physically abused or sexually abused or even verbally abused, but simply maybe they lived in an environment that was very unstable. Their parents constantly had violent arguments. Maybe they had to, I don't know, they grew up in a war zone, worst case scenario. They were exposed to violence from a young age, because moon conjunct Mars, think about it this way, Mars rules survival. It rules the survival instinct. So a person, one of the classical descriptions of the Moon-Mars conjunction is this person has very strong survival instinct, they have a quick mind, they have quick reactions, they have, they're very mechanical, they have a talent for things that are pragmatic, like engineering, like mechanics, like being a doctor, a surgeon, stuff like this. Everything that is Mars related. Why? Because Mars is a very cruel energy. Mars is war. It's the soldier. It's everything to do with survival, with fighting for your life. And usually when you see people who have Mars aspecting their moon, they were in that position where they felt unsafe. They felt they had to fight for their lives. Worst case scenario, they felt like they were alone against the world. So automatically, if you see this aspect in somebody's chart, it can show that they will have a tendency to have a quick temper, that they will tend to be brusque, they won't be diplomatic, definitely not. Unless there's also Venus aspecting or Jupiter aspecting this conjunction, it's very likely that they will show a negative expression of this aspect. So, just a few examples off the top of my head. I remember I googled Shia LaBeouf's chart, and I think he has either the conjunction or the opposition. Most likely the opposition. And that didn't surprise me at all. Like, actually, the very first time when I saw him, I knew this guy had PTSD. Like, not the very first, I don't remember the first time, actually the first time I saw him was in Holes, so scratch that because he was 10 years old. But no, the first time that I saw him as an adult, I could tell that he has PTSD just because of the way that he looks. He has this really intense stare, and a lot of the times, again, this is my opinion, I'm not a doctor, but a very intense stare, this very alert look in the eyes shows an overactive amygdala, which means the area of your brain that is responsible for the fight or flight response, and your instincts and survival instincts and reflexes and anger and impulsivity. And a person who was exposed to abuse as a child, they have an overactive amygdala even as an adult. So, when I saw him and the fact that he was acting out, the fact that he was getting into trouble with the law, that he had arguments with policemen, all of this kind of shows PTSD. And then, lo and behold, like last year or this year, he came out and made that movie called Honey Boy about his childhood and talked about how his father, the whole movie actually, where he actually plays the character of his father, is about how he was abused as his father as a child. And you can see that because he has moon conjunct Mars. Now, technically speaking, the moon does show mostly the mother, but it definitely what it shows is the early life environment and your mind. So it's not necessarily the mother. It's not like it's not necessarily the mother who was abusive. Sometimes it could be the mother. But what it shows is your childhood was abusive in some way. And the Mars aspects, the most important aspects that show this are the conjunction and the opposition, but there are also so-called special aspects that Mars makes, namely aspects the fourth house from itself, or the fourth sign from itself, and the eighth sign from itself. These are the aspects that Mars makes in Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology, again, there's no square, there's no trine, no sextile, no quintile, no quincunx, no semi-sextile. No, there are certain planets who make special aspects, and all planets make the conjunction and the opposition. But Mars makes the aspects the fourth house from itself, the seventh house from itself, which is the opposition, and the eighth house from itself. And each of these actually have certain nuances, but any of these aspects can show that Mars has touched a planet or a sign, and so it throws its energy into that planet. And another example that I remember from the top of my head was Patrick Swayze. Patrick Swayze actually only came out towards the end of his life, or like it came out towards the end of his career, that he had a very troubled relationship with his mother. And like his mother was abusive towards him when he was a child. And again, in his chart, Moon aspects Mars. I think it was like the fourth aspect or the eighth aspect. I don't remember. It was one of the other aspects. I don't think it was a conjunction or the opposition. But again, it shows abuse. Okay? And it shows, what it shows in a person's character is a person with Moon, Mars aspects tends to be less able to control their anger. That's what it ultimately means. And particularly when the Moon is also debilitated, like in Scorpio, it can definitely show somebody who cannot hold their anger. They will tend to be aggressive. They can tend to be cruel, unless this the Moon is also aspected by Jupiter, which kind of softens any aspect that it touches. Or Venus, again. Venus is a friend of the Moon and is benefic for the Moon. So it's not necessarily that these people will all be aggressive. But all in all, Moon Mars, definitely one of the aspects that I would look for when it comes to seeing somebody who's capable of any kind of criminal activity, like killing, like violence, like anything like that. The second most important, or maybe equally important, is Saturn. Moon-Saturn aspects. Again, here, actually I am only realizing this right now, but here you can see again, these planets, namely Mars and Saturn, are the planets that govern Scorpio and Aquarius. They also govern Capricorn, but Capricorn I would not see as a rule breaker, because Capricorn is very traditionalist and it doesn't have that co-ruling by Rahu as well. So Capricorn, I would say, is less likely to do anything sort of outside of the law, because they respect the establishment and they care most of all about social success and respect and all that stuff. So they're not going to do anything to compromise their status, so to speak. Of course, I'm sure that there are Capricorn killers, but I'm just saying in theory. This is what the energies mean. You have to look at the full chart to see if a person really has a high tendency to be a killer. So yeah, Saturn aspects. Moon conjunct Saturn, what this shows to me is this person grew up in a very cold, barren environment. It doesn't show violence, unlike the Mars aspects, but what it does show, first of all, is material hardship. This is the scenario for a person who grew up in a poor environment. They grew up in a poor family. They have seen their parents struggle to make ends meet. Maybe they were in one of those really, unfortunate level or categories of society. They felt discriminated because of their low status in society. Maybe they came from a poor family and they were sent to public school and the kids picked on them for being poor. Or they just went through horrible hardships. One famous example that I know of who has moon conjunct Saturn is Sophia Loren. Sophia Loren, if you read about her life, she had a very hard time growing up. They were very poor. She was raised by her mother and she had a sister, and it was them by themselves. They were abandoned by the father when she was very young. And not only that, but she grew up during the World War II in Italy, which was a time of severe famine and hardship and all this stuff. So, I mean, again, obviously Sophia Loren is not a serial killer. This is an example of somebody who manifested the positive aspect of this aspect, which is that it can create a person who is very diligent, very hardworking, very serious and determined because they grow up through a lot of hardships. And again, it's really funny because these aspects, Moon Mars and Moon Saturn aspects, they also show in people's charts who have reached high achievements, because a person and it goes hand in hand with psychology, because a person who has gone through a lot of hardships growing up can learn to overcome a lot of obstacles, develop a high level of stoicism, an ability to go through a lot of hardships to achieve what they want. But on the downside, it can show a person who doesn't handle the pressure too well and become unstable and become aggressive, or they take out their pain on others. And yeah, that's one thing that it can show. So Moon Saturn, again, the aspects that Saturn can make are the conjunction, the opposition, and Saturn also aspects the third house or sign from itself, and it also aspects the 10th house or sign from itself. So yeah, Saturn. Again, you have to look at the whole chart. I always mention this. And so far we have the list of aspects that will show somebody who tends to be a killer. We have planets in Aquarius, planets in Scorpio, planets in Nakshatra of Purva Bhadrapada, and we have aspects from Mars to the moon, aspects from Saturn to the moon. Now, actually, Saturn and Mars in general having a strong influence in the chart, but especially on the moon, will show a person who tends to be emotionally unstable or becomes a killer. Again, with Saturn aspects, what this shows is not somebody who is violent, but it shows a person who maybe was raised in such a cruel environment, not cruel, what's the word? Deprive, Saturn is deprivation. So it can show a person who was raised without any love. They were never shown affection. They can even reject physical signs of affection, like cuddling and hugs and stuff like. I actually know some people who have moon conjunct Saturn, and they seem so stiff, like they don't like to be touched. They're, because most likely what this shows is that in their early life, there was nobody there to really be physically affectionate with them. So to them, it's a very alien environment, the whole world of emotions. They tend to be so rational that they can just detach from their emotions completely. So it definitely shows somebody who's capable of cruelty, because they can just ignore empathy and emotion. And also because if they themselves have felt very unloved and very hurt when they were growing up, they will tend to take that out on others. Yeah, so the final aspects that I've noticed, Rahu and Ketu. Again, the co-rulers of Scorpio and Aquarius. Rahu and Ketu aspecting the moon makes a person emotionally unstable, especially the conjunction or the opposition. Again, when the moon is conjunct Rahu, it's opposite Ketu. When the moon is conjunct Ketu, it's opposite Rahu. So when you're aspecting one of them, you're aspecting the other as well. And the other aspects that Rahu and Ketu make are the 5th house from itself and the 9th house from itself. Rahu and Ketu, they both make these aspects. But a person with moon conjunct Rahu, they become very obsessive. Remember, the moon is the mind. And Rahu can make a person so emotionally obsessed or like so driven to achieve something material that they will walk over dead bodies to get it. And they can also literally, Ketu can literally show things like somebody who sees spirits. Like particularly in the water houses, like in the 4th, the 8th, or the 12th house. If you see somebody with moon conjunct Ketu on top of that, in one of the psychic signs, or like Pisces or something, this can be somebody who's literally affected by spirits, by demonic influences. It makes a person so intuitive that they are open to other dimensions and stuff like this. And that's why it can show emotional instability. And it also shows diminishment. It can also show hardships, like maybe it shows that your mother was absent, you were raised without a mother, because Ketu dissolves everything that it touches, everything material that it touches. So, and actually I was just thinking about this recently. One of my buddies that I had in college, his father, he was always very angry with his father, and his father was kind of like he was married to his mother until he was 18, but in the last 10 years that he was married, he kept taking long trips abroad for his job, until finally one day he said, he found another woman and wanted to get a divorce. And in his chart, and this buddy's chart, he had Ketu conjunct the sun. So his father was literally disappearing from his life. And this can show hardship, again, because the person feels unloved, unwanted by this person. And in conjunction with other aspects, it can lead to somebody who will do something, criminal or not very nice to other people. Another aspect, I wouldn't say much, but let's say less important than moon aspects, are sun aspects. Again, for the same token, the sun is the father figure. The sun is the vitality. It's the soul path. So when you see people who have Mars aspecting the sun, Saturn aspecting the sun, Rahu aspecting the sun, it shows that the father figure was not that great. Particularly in some house placements, like sun in the 4th house, where it's at its lowest point, or in the 7th house, or sun is in Libra, where it's debilitated. The signs of not just Libra, it's particularly debilitated in Libra, but it's debilitated, it's afflicted in pretty much any sign of Venus or Saturn. So again, Saturn, we have Aquarius. Again, people with sun in Aquarius, they're all a bit weird. So when the sun is weak, it shows that the father figure was weak. And what is the father figure really? Think about it in psychology as well. The father is supposed to be the person who takes you out in the world, right? The mother was the home base, and the father was the one to take the person out in the world and show them how to behave and show them how to be a decent human being. In the old days, sons would follow into their father's professions, right? The father was taking them to work, to be a blacksmith or whatever, and teach them how to work with metal or whatever the father's profession was. So when you have a weak son, it shows that you had a very weak father figure. It can show, like, if you have, like, Rahu conjunct sun, if you have Ketu conjunct sun, if you have Rahu in particular in some aspects, in some signs, it can show that your father was an alcoholic, your father was a gambler, your father was a womanizer. Your father didn't teach you how to be a decent human being, because he himself was a very troubled individual. And a small parenthesis, actually, people, particularly men with sun conjunct Rahu, tend to be narcissists. Why? Because Rahu, again, is the energy of what you want to be, what you want to have. Rahu conjunct sun shows that you never have enough ego, you never have enough pride. And it tends to show a person who is, constantly wanting to shine brighter than they did yesterday. It can show womanizers, men who do things for status, for the show, for men who do dubious things, to achieve attention from the public. But this is just a parenthesis. Okay, so I'm gonna get into some examples. Finally, I'm not gonna make a separate video because we still have some time left. I gotta work on night shift, so I still have some time left to talk about examples. So here's a really cool example. Marcel Petiot. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that. It's Marcel Petiot, written something like that. He was born on January 17th, 1897. He was one of the most famous killers in history. So, and he was, if you read about his life, a classic psychopath. I mean, this guy basically killed for money. Because and he showed tendency towards violence from a very young age, even though there was nothing in his early upbringing to show that, he will become violent. At least there was nothing documented about his life that might show a tendency towards violence. But his whole life was built on lies. He lied to become a doctor. He lied that he was wealthy to get married. He was famous because they found 23 bodies, the remains of 23 bodies in the basement of his house during the late years of the World War II days, like the late year, I think 1944, 1945. So apparently what they found out was that he was trying to lure Jewish victims, promising them that they're going to take them to the U.S. or something, and then he would basically kill them and take their money and possessions. And in his chart, okay, Sun conjunct Mercury conjunct Rahu in Capricorn in the 4th house. Again, I mentioned weak father figure. Okay, he has Sun is in the sign of Saturn. Now, normally I said Capricorn is not necessarily a deal breaker, a rule breaker, but in this particular case, Sun is conjunct Rahu, and it's in the 4th house, a very weak placement. The father figure is a very weak here. Didn't teach them good morals, because I can see that from the conjunction with Rahu. Okay, not very stable. Also, what I see in his chart, Saturn was in Scorpio in the 2nd house. Okay, what does this show? A very poor family life. Okay, Saturn, the 2nd house rules early family life, and it also rules finances. Saturn in the 2nd house shows financial hardships, and it also shows to me that the relations with the family are very cold. So this is a person who maybe was not shown a lot of affection. Again, I'm not trying to justify that this is why he did what he did, but there are signs in his chart that would point out to somebody who will break the rules. Let me see. Moon is in Gemini. So no major aspects there. But Saturn is aspecting the Sun, Mercury, Rahu by 3rd aspect. So you also have Saturn there. And Saturn opposite a Mars-Pluto conjunction. There are a lot of signs of violence. By the way, I did mention that I focus on Vedic astrology, but I also look at Pluto a lot of the times, particularly when it comes to conjunction. And this is a small parenthesis. One thing that I do look for from the tropical perspective is when you see Mars-Pluto hard aspects, it tends to show violence and violent characters. The hard aspects meaning in tropical astrology conjunction, square, or opposition. Why? Because this shows, remember, power struggles. So when you see somebody with Mars conjunct Pluto, this is a very power-hungry individual. And most likely was used to violence at some point in their life. And they have had their power questioned, particularly, again, with not so much with the conjunction, with the square in opposition. It can show a man who is very insecure about his masculinity, and he's trying to He's basically trying to prove that he's the big boss, like he's on top of the situation and he is in control and everything. And now, here's the thing. In this chart, so Marcel Petiot, one of the things that I've noticed again that I wanted to mention about the charts of serial killers that I've looked at, is a lot of the times Saturn is aspecting Rahu and Ketu. And I think there is something to this because Rahu and Ketu show, remember, Rahu is what you have to experience in this life, Ketu shows your past life. So when you have Saturn aspecting this Rahu-Ketu axis, it shows that your life is somehow connected to hardships, to the miseries of life. Saturn actually rules things like the lower class people. It shows hard work, hard physical labor, degrading work, things that you do just to pay the bills for survival. It rules things like the lower working classes or something. And a person who has a lot of Saturn, again, there could be issues regarding poverty in their early life. There could be issues regarding, feeling like an outcast because of their social status, pushed aside because they didn't have enough money, because they didn't have the right origins. So it can definitely show a tendency towards instability. Here's another example. Let me see. Heath Neville, born 6th of June, 1917. Gruesome murders of young and mature women. I just made notes. Okay, so he had Sun in Taurus, conjunct Jupiter, conjunct Mars in the 11th house. Sun is in the sign of Venus, right? Sun is in Taurus. Again, this Sun is not particularly strong. In the 11th house, the house of Saturn. Not an especially weak placement, but it's not a great placement either. Sun is conjunct Mars and conjunct Jupiter. And here what is really interesting is that you also have Sun conjunct Jupiter, so you would think there is a light at the end of the tunnel there because this person is, aspected by the great benefic. But in this triple conjunction, Jupiter is in Taurus. Jupiter, like the Sun, is very weak because Venus is an enemy sign of Jupiter. So what this basically shows me is that out of this triple conjunction, it's most likely that Mars is the strongest. So Mars is overpowering his Sun and his Jupiter. Mars, the planet of violence and aggression, is overpowering anything positive that might come from Jupiter or the Sun. So things like higher morals and values and being a good, decent citizen. And it also shows that the father figure most likely was somebody with a violent temper. Moon is conjunct Rahu in Sagittarius, opposite Venus. So Venus is conjunct Ketu. This is very interesting. Venus conjunct Ketu. I actually wrote here, maybe he liked to see other people die. Remember, Venus is what you like, and Ketu is death, diminishment, disappearing. It's spirituality. Another interpretation could be Venus conjunct Ketu shows somebody who in this life is moving away from all things Venus. But what is most interesting here in this chart is that Venus actually governs the Sun, is like the dispositor of the Sun, Mars, and Jupiter conjunction, because this conjunction takes place in Taurus. And so basically, ultimately, both the Sun and the Moon are being influenced by Ketu, because the dispositor of the Sun is Venus, and Venus is conjunct Ketu, and the Moon is opposite Ketu, and the Moon is also conjunct Rahu. So in any case, you have a lot of demonic influences here that make a person confused and immoral, basically. So let me see, because I have a list. This is interesting. Angelo Bueno Jr., I think it's Bueno. and Kenneth Bianchi, they worked as a team of serial killers called the Stranglers, the Hillside Stranglers, something like that. You can Google them. So Angelo Bueno Jr. was born October 5th, 1934, and he was a murderer, rapist, torturer. So one thing that I will say with all of these killers is you also have to understand they have different motivations. A psychopath, like I told you in the first example with the French guy, the French doctor who claimed to be a doctor, he was actually not even a real doctor. He was a psychopath, but he killed for money. His motivation was money. So, and you could see that in his chart because there are a lot of harsh Saturn aspects, which show that a person has suffered poverty in their early life. And with things like that are sexually motivated, like crimes that are sexually motivated, you have to look for things that show, basically sexual motivation in a chart. So yeah, let me see. Also, very interesting, again, Kenneth Bianchi, which one? I forgot. So, yeah, there was a duo of killers. So, Kenneth Bianchi has Moon in Scorpio, opposite Mars, opposite Sun. He was born May 22nd, 1951. And so these two guys, Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Bueno, I think were cousins or something like that. And together they killed 10 women, and they separated, and one or both of them continued to kill. It's really fucked up. Yeah, but this guy, you can clearly see sexual motivation here. Moon in Scorpio, opposite Mars, opposite Sun. Okay, opposite Sun is not necessarily debilitation, but Moon in Scorpio, opposite Mars, this is an emotionally unstable, violent person. And Scorpio can definitely show sexual motivation in murder. Saturn in Virgo aspects the Moon. So his Moon is in Scorpio, debilitated, opposite Mars, and also aspected by Saturn. This is a very troubled mind. A mind that is under a lot of pressure, and most likely his early childhood was abusive. And this other guy, Angelo Bueno, he had Moon in Cancer, which is not necessarily bad, opposite Saturn, conjunct Ketu. Again, conjunct Ketu can show that demonic possession. Moon in Cancer in the 12th house, no less. Conjunct Ketu, a very troubled mind. Opposite Saturn, a lot of hardship, a lot of material hardship. And again, you have to understand, you have to take everything into account, because in this case, maybe you don't necessarily see, you don't see the Scorpio, you don't see the Mars. You might think this doesn't explain sexual motivation. But in a man's chart, poverty can actually motivate crime. Why? Because men who are poor, or they are raised in that, discriminated status of being lower class, of not having enough money. Think about it this way. Think about psychology. They cannot get women, or they feel rejected by women, or they're not handsome enough to be. You have to look at everything. And it's very likely that if they also have these aspects that show cruelty already, they are used to cruelty, they're used to being bullied, they can cross over into wanting to inflict pain on others. So yeah, in both of these guys' charts, you have debilitated Moon, afflicted Moon, not debilitated necessarily. Only one of them is Kenneth Bianchi had Moon in Scorpio, so that is debilitated. And also Angelo Bono had, so Moon in Cancer, remember what I said about demonic possession, Moon in Cancer, conjunct Ketu in the 12th house. This person probably had his mind on a different planet, like was probably detached from reality. Opposite Saturn also shows hardships, could show that he was raised in poverty, was not shown affection, didn't know anything about affection, etc., didn't know how to express his feelings, didn't feel accepted in society. Saturn conjunct Rahu. Again, we have the theme of Saturn touching Rahu. Saturn conjunct Rahu means that in his lifetime, he was meant to experience hardship. in Capricorn, no less. Very strong Rahu and very strong Saturn placement on the Rahu. Okay, now we have John Collins, the Michigan co-ed killer, born 17th of June, 1947. Raped, tortured, mutilated 10 female victims. He also had a foot fetish. This is stuff that I wrote. I can't believe I wrote this stuff. Venus conjunct Rahu in Kritika. Another thing that I wanted to mention, why did I write Venus conjunct Rahu in Kritika? Actually, Kritika, by the way, is a nakshatra that is also ruled by an axe, or it's connected to cutting and being brutal and all that stuff, but it's actually not a negative nakshatra in itself. But it can show a person who is very harsh in any way. Why Venus conjunct Rahu, though? I pointed this out because men who have Venus conjunct Rahu, they are obsessed with women. They tend to be womanizers. If no other negative thing can be said, at the very least, they are womanizers. They never get enough of women. They always want more. And it's not unsurprising that you will see a serial killer also having Rahu aspecting Venus, because a lot of times serial killers, they have multiple victims, they have a lot of women. And again, it can show, a guy doesn't get enough. Like, he maybe has a wife at home, or whatever, they don't get enough women. They keep doing the same thing, they keep killing or whatever, because they constantly want more. It could be just a thing of lust, really, for somebody with Venus conjunct Rahu. So, he also had Saturn in Cancer aspecting the North Node, 10th aspect. He also had Moon conjunct Rahu conjunct Venus in Taurus, in the Rohini Nakshatra. Moon conjunct Rahu conjunct Venus, Moon conjunct Rahu, again, the mind was in the toilet. Even though there was Venus there might have been a little bit of positive aspect, but if you throw Rahu in the mix, it destroys everything that it touches, unless you have Jupiter there to maybe counteract the negative impact of Rahu. Yeah. Dean Arnold Corll, born December 24th, 1939. Oh yeah, I remember this guy. I did a little bit of research about this. Oh, sorry about mumbling. I remember this guy. Yeah, I read a little bit about his biography. So this guy was a killer who killed men, also sexually motivated. One of the things that I noticed about this guy, he has Mars in Purva Bhadrapada. Mars, the planet of sexuality, is in Purva Bhadrapada. Remember what I said in the beginning? Purva Bhadrapada is a nakshatra that rules sexual deviations, sexual perversions, weird sexual interests. This guy discovered he was a homosexual, and remember, he was born in 1939. So he lived in a time when homosexuality was completely unacceptable, time and place. His early life also showed hardship and instability, but having Mars in Purva Bhadrapada, he tortured and raped and killed his male victims, who most of which were young boys, teenagers, and yeah, messed up, very messed up. Mars is not just in Purva Bhadrapada, but in Aquarius, and aspects Moon in Taurus by the 4th aspect. The only aspect that the Moon makes. And remember I said Mars aspecting Moon shows instability, volatility. South Node is conjunct Saturn. Again, Saturn is aspecting the nodal axis. And not just that, South Node is conjunct Saturn in Aries. This is interesting. This is again kind of like why you have to look at the whole chart. Because in particular, in this case, it's just Mars aspecting Moon. Maybe that doesn't necessarily show, a killer. But Mars in Purva Bhadrapada shows his sexuality was very forbidden. And in his case, most likely it was like that he had very taboo interests. He was sexually motivated for his crime. So he probably got off on the power that he had over these men, which is really messed up. And he also having, what was I going to say? Yeah, South Node conjunct Saturn in Aries. Saturn is debilitated in Aries. So Saturn, the planet that shows things like hard work, like social norms, social regulations, is debilitated. So this person doesn't really respect social norms, doesn't respect the rules, basically. Doesn't care about hard work, things like that. Saturn conjunct, so, and also being South Node conjunct Saturn, it means that this person, for many lives, has been used to a harsh existence. They are used to cruelty, to harshness, to coldness, to lack of feeling, lack of empathy. So one of the things that I mentioned that support the moon being aspected by Mars is that his mother divorced his father because of frequent quarreling. This is like the stuff that I found online. Like I said, Mars on the moon shows aggressive early life. Mother remarried the same husband again and then divorced again. And then married a stepfather. So this guy, Dean, killed 28 teenagers. Can you imagine that shit? My god, okay, Anton Costa, born 2nd of August 1944. I don't remember exactly. This guy was a killer as well. I haven't written it here, but I guess he was a killer. He has Moon in Sagittarius opposite Saturn in Gemini. The only aspect that the moon makes. Again, Mars is conjunct Mercury, conjunct Jupiter in Leo. Oh, Sun is conjunct Rahu and Venus in Cancer. Again, the weak father figure. Sun conjunct Rahu, conjunct Venus. In Cancer, okay, Cancer is not a particularly weak placement for the Sun, but being conjunct Venus and Rahu, those are the enemy planets of the Sun. Ascendant conjunct Pluto. Pluto is also strong. And, wait, not ascendant. Venus is conjunct Pluto, sorry. So Venus is also strong. Pluto is strong. Richard Cottingham, born November 25th, 1946. 9 confirmed kills by dismemberment, male victims, claimed to kill 100 people. The moon makes no major aspects, and it's in Sagittarius. Ascendant, Rahu is in the first house. Okay, this is another where I have to make a parenthesis. Rahu in the first house. Why did I write this down? So he was confirmed to have killed 9 people, but he actually claimed to kill 100. Rahu in strong placements, and in this case, this guy had Ascendant in Taurus, Rahu in the first house. This shows that this person was very likely strong in narcissistic traits. Why? Rahu in the first house, they are desperate for attention. And the fact that he claimed to kill 100 people, a lot more than were confirmed, shows that he was proud of what he was doing. He was doing it for attention. To some extent, he was doing it for the fame. On some subconscious level, I'm sure. Also, Ketu conjunct Mars, conjunct Sun, conjunct Mercury in Scorpio. All of this multiple conjunction in Scorpio, right? So, first of all, what this shows me is Sun is weak. Again, Sun is conjunct Mars, violence, conjunct Ketu, more violence. In Scorpio, past life. Ketu is also past life. So from this conjunction, you can say not only that his father was a weak father figure in terms of teaching him good values, but his entire past life incarnations were connected to violence. Conjunct Mars, conjunct Sun, conjunct Mercury. All of them in Scorpio. So this is a person who really mastered cruelty. And again, you have extreme violence, like dismemberments, killing and dismembering. Another thing is Venus in Jupiter. Venus conjunct Jupiter. Again, this actually can show a person who is a obsessed with whose Jupiter is being corrupted. Why? Because what is Jupiter? Jupiter is high morals, it's principles, it's values, it's spirituality and stuff like that. Conjunct Venus, or in a sign of Venus, it shows that this person's morality, or the things that the high ideals that they hold in life, are connected to hedonism. They just want instant gratification, pleasure. They don't really care about morality or higher learning or any of the things that are ruled by Jupiter, because Jupiter in his chart is in Libra, so it's already in a sign of Venus, and it's conjunct Venus. So Venus is totally dominating Jupiter, which shows low morality. And no sense of justice, really. Jeffrey Dahmer, you probably know this one. Born May 21st, 1960, he was famous for cannibalism, killing, I don't know how many victims, but he killed male victims. He was a homosexual and killed male victims and kept their body parts in the fridge and then ate their body parts. Messed up beyond measure. His ascendant in Virgo, his Mercury. Oh, one of the things that I noticed with a lot of these people, I'm not sure what the correlation is, but one of the things that I've seen with a lot of the charts that I looked at was that the ascendant ruler was conjunct the sun. Now, this could show, I think, weakness of the moral integrity of a person, because the sun is actually seen as a negative in Vedic astrology. It's to some extent, it burns the signification of the house that it sits in, and it also burns any planet that comes into conjunction with the sun, especially under 10 degrees conjunctions. It's called combustion. Like the sun will burn up the signification of that planet. And one of the things that I notice a lot of the times is that the ascendant ruler, which is by definition one of the planets that show your outlook on life and your physical body and everything, is conjunct the sun. So it could be also leading to a distorted image of the world. Or at the very least, somebody who wants attention by any means. So the sun is aspected by Mars. Sun is aspected by Mars. Here you have the father figure being negative. Aggressive and violent. Rahu aspects Saturn conjunct Sun, Saturn conjunct Jupiter in Sagittarius. Fifth aspect. Again, Rahu aspects Saturn. So you have this connection between Rahu and Saturn. Here it's not like Saturn, the aspects, actually I'm not sure if it goes the other way around, Sagittarius. Yeah, it does. So Saturn is also aspecting Rahu. It's really weird here because you have Saturn conjunct Jupiter. Usually what they say with Saturn conjunct Jupiter is that Saturn is weakening Jupiter. Even though Jupiter is the great benefic and normally it blesses everything that it touches, when it is conjunct Saturn, it's being weakened by Saturn. Saturn is basically eating it up from the inside, the signification of Jupiter. So it's a weakened Jupiter, is again, even though it's Jupiter in Sagittarius, it's still being weakened by Saturn. And why do I say this? Because in this case, both Saturn and Jupiter are conjunct together and they're aspecting Rahu, but the morality was not strong enough to overpower the killer tendencies. Moon conjunct Mars in Pisces in the 7th house. The 7th house is the house of the other, the house of partnership. So in his case, quite literally, the Moon-Mars conjunction, the aggression the violence that he experienced in his early life was taken out on his partners. It's pretty obvious here, but again, Moon conjunct Mars, like I said, this person, and I remember actually watched a documentary about Dahmer a long time ago, and his father, to me it strikes me like his father is a covert narcissist, but obviously I have no proof of this. But the fact that, his father is somebody who's, I think, very deceptive, because the way that he talked about his son was not I don't know, like, and there were a lot of people, not just my opinion, there were a lot of people who were saying things like, they don't believe, there were rumors that Dahmer was sexually abused as a child. I don't know, by his father, or his father was covering for it. I don't know, there was some shit going on there. But in any case, his early life, despite the fact that his father on the surface seemed like a very educated, quiet, soft-spoken person, his astrological chart shows that in his early life he experienced some kind of violence. Yeah, what do I know? I'm just an astrologer by hobby. So yeah, those were a few examples that I had to... Wow, this is a really long video. Thank you if you have survived until the end. And thank you for paying attention. And I have to get to work, and I'll probably post this like tomorrow or something, because I still have to like put pictures on it and make it pretty. So thank you for paying attention, and please like and subscribe if you liked it, and can't wait to hear your feedback. Yeah, so thank you. Have a nice day.